Hello, everyone. Hard to believe that we are here at June 1st, here at the halfway through the year, and we are thrilled to have everyone on our panel tonight. We have my partner, Ken Pearson. We have the lovely Margaret Rue. We have John Bonzo looking dapper in his artist hat this evening, and we have Karen Elkins bringing up the West Coast here. So much to cover here as we are in lesson 46 in Unit 12. Unit 12 is one of my favorite units out of the entire home study course, so I cannot wait to dive into the conversation. But before we do, I'm going to ask Ken to just take us through with the ocean sounds, a little bit of a meditation here this evening.
Enter into meditation, and we use the words of concentration to wind our minds up and decentration to unwind our mind. And as you unwind your mind, it's a desiring process, it's not a thinking process. Obviously, thinking would be concentrating, the desire to have longer and longer thoughts as opposed to shorter and shorter and faster thoughts. Let your thoughts get longer and longer. It's almost like a dream, a daydreaming state where your mind is actually full, but it's not focused on any one thing. And what will help you to synchronize with that is listen to the waves of the ocean and become one with them by desire and the rhythm of the ocean. Beauty, the sky, and the sunset. And let that become a part of you by desiring to decentrate and to be still for just a moment. A timeless moment when we stop thinking. And in that timeless moment, we are one with our Creator because our brains are no longer in the way. Let these words guide you that come from our home study course from the Divine Iliad. And it goes like this. The glory of thy anointing light descends upon me, and my soul quickens. Thy light is all around me. Thy light shines through me. Thy light encompasses me. I am dissolved in thy light. Thy light and my light have become one. I am immersed in my light. And I am in thy light, knowing thy light. And here I say, be thou with me, so that I would never be myself alone. And just to connect to that principle of you're not alone. And that light, that omnipresent light, that omniscient light, that omnipotent light centers you. As you, each individual, is the center of your own universe. Within that center is stillness, not motion. So desire to connect to the stillness that centers you. And allow the synchronicity of the waves, and the beauty of the sunset to allow you to where there is no motion, and you desire to connect to that God within. So let your thinking get longer and longer. Thoughts get slower and slower. And the ultimate goal is to achieve that timeless moment where there are no thoughts, nothing to think of, just stillness. I'll give you 30 more seconds. Just breathe all that in and desire stillness. desire for the quiet within. And remember, meditation is not to be measured. I did really good, I did really bad. Every meditation, no matter how short or how long, is a partial elimination every single time you meditate. That's why it's so important to make a practice of it. We'll go 15 more seconds of just stillness. All right, come on back.
All right, everyone. I want to say a welcome to Bonnie and Deb and Terry. So good, and Rita. Good to see you all. John, thank you so much for taking that clip of that sunset video that we've ended up using for all of our episodes. It's a lovely way to ground ourselves. I know myself, my soul has been craving getting near the ocean, and I now understand why. It ties into that universal heartbeat and just really centers us. So a gracious thank you to you again.
You're welcome. It's a sunrise, by the way.
Sunrise, thank you. I know that you have an affinity for sunrises and sunsets, and you tend to be on the hunt for them along with Ken about the beauty of those things. So I appreciate it. So I wanted to ask the panel before we dive into the actual lesson here tonight, what was the one thing that stood out to you in the lesson? What touched your heart as you were studying and preparing for this evening? John?
Well, I reflected on our conversation yesterday morning to where we both kind of just realized where the world was, where society is, where man's thinking is. And, it's not necessarily the happiest place. Okay. But, we're here, we're going to make the best of it. And I've always said that just because things are the way they are, doesn't mean it's the way that they could be or should be. So you're the creator of your own kingdom. And these points that we're going to cover this evening is what makes an individual, a family, a society, a school, whatever, the world, something that you want to be part of or not. So we'll let everybody kind of find their own spot.
All right. Well said, Margaret.
Yeah, I would say, if I didn't have these lessons, the course and the knowledge, I think it's a scary world, because the narrative on TV is not positive. It does scare people. So when you have this knowledge, you feel like you're insulated from much of the adversity that is conveyed over the airwaves. Yes. And you learn to control your own content and create your own character, create your own life. And you realize the more you give out of yourself, God gives you more knowledge. So it's just nice because it's like a never-ending spring or fountain, really. But you do have to give out of yourself in order to acquire new knowledge.
Okay, I love that. You want to chime in?
Yeah, I like, we're going to be talking about character. And that was introduced to me, believe it or not, in my late 20s before I even knew what it meant. I was like, what kind of character are you, Ken? And I thought, what does that mean? Well, you think of a screenplay, and I've written screenplays before. So within the screenplay, you got multiple characters, and each character serves a function in telling a story. So, the character that I am and that I was at that time was a random character. I had no particular scope, no measurement, no guidelines. So one day I could be good, one day I was bad, but I didn't understand that character was something you built. Whether you were aware of it or not, you're building character every day. And if you aren't aware of it, then the character you're building is a character of unawareness. If you are aware of it, then you're building a character of awareness, which leads to those kind of guidelines in life, how to take direction. You know, a good character, whether it turns left or right, doesn't matter, because God goes with them. So you now can make decisions without wondering, oh, I used to turn right and then I wonder if I went left, what would have happened? And I don't have to do that anymore because of character, and centering my character by desire is God. And therefore, when I turn right, I've made a decision to go right. I don't wonder what's left because I'm to the right. So, you know, character helps to define things. And we're going to talk about humility, which is one of my favorite words, which is a lot about character. Humility is what character to me really centers. All characters, if it's a positive character, is centered by humility.
I love that. Karen, you had a thought, and you were bringing in a lot of the little booklets as you were studying here this time.
Was because this unit has a lot to do with what we did in Unit 5. And so it's kind of some way of a wrap up. But the other thing that I want to bring back into it is when you look at this character part that we're talking about tonight, it also harkens to the science of it. So that if you actually follow the science and you see the mirrored universe, that we get the reflection of who and what we are being in any given moment in time. But the other part is what stories, I think, is the rest of you are talking about. What stories are being told? What are we buying into? And I know that in many our own CIA and things like that have created what they call color revolutions, and they've done everything they could to divide societies, and it doesn't matter, and they're doing it all over the world, and now they've done it to us. So now we get to have the repercussions of these mirrors. And what it does is that it's a complete dividing part of it, and it's not loving. They create the divided. So it goes back to the science of how do we not create war, which is in one of his other books, which is this one, which has everything to do with being not divided, being together, thinking together, and making sure that whenever we do anything, we do it reciprocally and not saying, I'm taking this from you. That's what creates the wars. So it's an interesting, and taking has nothing to do with character. So all these little books have been, how do you love one another? I mean, these have been really, I'm just looking just a little deeper. So anyway, thank you. That's what I was thinking about.
So I wanted to be sure that we list the books there. You'll see that on the link there for everyone. Hello, Susie. Hello, Terry. Good to see you all. The little books are some of our favorites, and they're also make for great gifts. So I love the fact that Karen was looking at that today. So
remember one more thing on character, just so that I found out, is I was kind of a shady character, right? There's shady characters, there's good characters, there's all kinds of character. When we talk character, just character doesn't mean something positive. You can be an ugly character, a defiant character, a selfish character, and a giving character, and a loving character, and an honorable character. So character is more about me helping to identify where I'm at. What character, when you look in the mirror, what character do you see?
Well, this lesson is technically short, but I have to tell you, it is has a lot of deep concepts. So team, shall we go ahead and begin? Let's go ahead and dive into 857. And I'm going to ask Margaret, if you would. You'll see some things that first paragraph and the first little bracketed area that I have highlighted. If you would read the title and all the way down to the highlighted yellow section, please.
Okay. The manifestation of love in character. The great men of all time were men of character, men who have reached such supreme heights of wisdom, justice, and righteousness that it can be said of them that they closely emulate God on earth. God, the Creator, is light. The language of light is love. Men of character are the light of the world. Their every deed and action is based upon love, which is balance.
All right, that's pretty big. So I wanted to have us slow down there for just a minute, because I found that those words, first of all, we know that the way Walter and Leo talk, they're talking about both men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to be sure that we're clear about that. John, what does that mean? What does it mean what we just read? Because those are pretty big concepts.
Well, what one should do is reflect on history and test yourself. Try to identify people of the world and throughout history that you would identify as people of character, and then look at their accomplishments and look what they're being known for. All right, and they'll stand out and they'll live forever because of that standard of high character. So, like Ken said, it's something that's built, and it's built on your own actions and your own understanding. And we're in a tough spot as a civilization. We're 70 years after the Russells wrote this home study course, and they were worried about the fall of man then. I'd hate to think what their opinion would be today. So, but I've said to the panel and other people, the most important thing is to take care of you first, because until you do, you can't help anybody. So go ahead and build your own character so that people will come to you. They'll want to be around you, and they want to know what, or ask to what you have to say about certain things, and then gives you a chance to demonstrate your character as well. So that's my take.
All right. I love it. Margaret, you want to weigh in?
Yes, I think when you think of great men, I always think of Mahatma Gandhi in India, because he was able to take down a very huge imperialistic country and gain possession of his country all through nonviolence. And see, it says here, their every deed and action is based upon love, which is balance. Gandhi understood that this current situation in his country was imbalanced. And so he had to do right action in order to create balance again. And it's a continual struggle. India has not always been successful, but he saw the injustice on his own people. And so he made efforts to correct it.
Well, and I find it fascinating that you bring that up, because it talks about every deed and action. So can we all think about that, every deed and action that we take every day? So the question is that centered in love and balance at every moment? I'm just curious.
Well, I would take the converse side of that today, as we're talking about the way society is and why John is saying we're in trouble. Social consciousness seems to be out the door, right? How many characters do you see in a grocery store yelling and screaming at everyone as though they have no social consciousness anymore? And a good character is always socially conscious aware, right? Because there's a rhythm to everything. If you walk into a room and there are two people talking in that room and they're talking quietly, there's a rhythm going on. So if you come in and blah, 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 and you start raising the value, you just disrupted a rhythm. So a person of character is always looking to see what's the environment, what's the rhythm like. A person lacking character, it seems like an epidemic today. They got a name called Karens, no pun intended, Karen Elkin. But they got I don't know what they call men that do that, but what it comes down to is the ability to display the most childish, terrible behavior in public, and people are filming you while you do it, and then they want to punch you because you're filming them while they're acting completely like a character that doesn't have any soundness. There's no quality. It's an ugly character. So it's important to see both sides. And that's why I learned character is built through moral principles, values. That's how you build character. And we're going to read some of those values as we get later in the lesson. But character is about building. I had to build a new character. And I'm a man from recovery. So I had done drugs and alcohol, and that was the old character. And in order to become a new character, I needed a psychic change. And that psychic change was the spiritual awakening of God within, which then I started about living by different values. I didn't want to stretch the truth. Things like that became of value to me. And I can't even tell you how many calls. Kimberly will tell you how many calls I get from people wanting to know the answer to a lot of their life's dilemmas. So as a man of character and learning character, and what we're doing in this home study course, People want to know. And they're like, what are you doing? How do you stay so content? How do you stay in such a good attitude? And that's what people are saying. What's your insight? What's the skinny? And that to me is all about a living God as opposed to a praying God. And having, as a character that I am today, I'm always trying to reach for God's thoughts, feelings, and actions in everything I do.
I have a question. Wait, Kimberly, you actually teach a lot of this with what you do professionally. And usually you tell everybody else to ask questions. So I'm going to ask you, with what you teach, about the sheep and the different things that you talk about. So why don't you pipe in on this one?
I appreciate that. So much of what we have happening in society that I've seen, because so my world is corporate, and I find that people keep looking to a leader, to a set of leaders for the answers. And the work that I've done is constantly trying to have people begin to look in the mirror and understand that they are a leader of themselves, and that we really need no title, an official title, to be a leader. That if all of us were to take that step and step into leadership of life, of our life, then it would begin to set through the society and the dominoes that you were talking about. I mean, I was just in the airport the other day and talking about somebody who was completely unaware. She was screaming at her partner on the phone, walking through the terminal, screaming, cussing, radiated out this, just like it was this unbalanced wave, Margaret. You could feel this wave just wash over everyone there. And she was completely unaware of just how she had entered. She had literally emotionally vomited, lost her cool to the such that she upset the balance in society in general, and for that moment. And everybody was looking at each other because no one was quite aware, Margaret, of how to get back into balance. And so to me, it's a self discipline and an honor, because I see leadership even of ourselves as, even though they don't use the word specific leadership here, they use things like humility and character. I believe all of those things tie into that. So I do want to mention, Deb said this. She says, I love those little books. Speaking of the books that Karen spoke, that would be great for the next series of Awaken. Thank you for the idea, Deb. And Bonnie chimes in and says, Gandhi is a great example of character.
I want to mention one more person of character I think that people know, and such a great story, and it's Nelson Mandela. Whenever I'm in like a bad spot or got into a low spot, I always thought about, what do I have to complain about when there are men like Nelson Mandela? He spent 27 years in jail. They offered him to come out. They gave him all kinds of ways, just keep the peace, but he would not comply and give up his character, his standards. And then what happened is one of his sons got murdered by the so-called apartheids or whatever that were against what Nelson Mandela was doing. And his wife came to him and said, the wife he was married to that saw him in jail for all those years, and said, we found out who murdered our son and I want retribution. I want to. And Nelson said, absolutely not. Do not do anything to that person. I do not want anything done to them, because all it would make us is exactly like them. Well, she decided that as a mother, it was a little bit too beyond. So she had that man taken out. And Nelson Mandela never said a thing to her. But the minute that he got out of prison, he divorced his wife. And he said, I cannot be with you anymore, because I asked you to do something out of standing for our nation and for character, and you defied me, and therefore I cannot see you as my significant mate. And he proceeded to get a divorce from her for that reason. So that is character, right? I mean, I asked a request, she didn't do it. You murdered someone, that's one thing, but are you authorized someone getting murdered? But the character is what's important. And why care? And one of the things in recovery that is in step 7 says we humbly ask and remove our shortcomings, which is all about character and about how we think honesty, tolerance, and being a good person is important to get along with the business of being self-satisfied. But do we make the habit of love, of tolerance of man, honesty, love, and tolerance of man and God a daily basis of living, whether we're satisfied or not? And when a lot of people, when it comes to choosing character over comfort, another way for comfort would be money, things, right? How many people compromise their character for that which their body needs. And that goes back into a statement that Christ said that and so we do have character, but when it comes to comfort and character, where do you stand? And that to me is where the rubber hits the road.
I think we have Suzanne on the over here saying, well, what about the Messiah, which was actually Walter Russell's favorite person in this essence of being a spiritual leader and bringing the message of love.
Absolutely.
And then it goes back and harkens to what Ken's saying and talk about the ultimate sacrifice.
So let's continue here with page 858. I'm going to ask John, if we could, we're going to scroll down to the first full paragraph. It says, if we are ever to restore, and I'm going to ask you to read those two paragraphs. If we ever to restore, and go ahead on to that next paragraph as well.
I would be delighted to. If we are ever to restore our civilization to a state where the people of Earth can live happily together as one world family, we must build godly people whose innate nobility is so basic that it would be impossible for them to act in any other than a noble way. So let us review what we mean by that. A man of fine character is one who can be defined as a perfect gentleman. The best definition of a perfect gentleman is that he is one who can always be counted upon to do the right thing. If our world were made up of people who always did the right thing, we would have no crime, no prisons, no wars, no need for locking our doors for protection, no unhappiness resulting from the wrong things people are forever doing.
Now, I'm going to continue to read on, and I'm going to ask the panel for comment. A gentleman or gentlewoman of high character could not possibly speak ill of anyone, nor repeat one word of malicious gossip. Nor could he take the slightest advantage of anyone in either social or business affairs, for he would know that gaining such an advantage would be the price of his own soul. A noble man or woman of high character looks noble and beautiful, no matter what size, shape, or color his physical features are. His nobility brings a radiance to his personage, a radiance which magnetically draws others to him. He stands apart like a light from his fellow men. The power of his presence overwhelms and overpowers every lesser character. There is an ageless quality about him. So let me ask the group, and I know this is one of Ken's favorite sections as well. So Margaret and John, being that you all lived with Leo, can you relate those few paragraphs there with what you experienced with Leo Russell? Margaret?
Yeah, I often remember this was probably only 2 weeks before she refolded. She was coming down the staircase and she was walking like a teenager. And she was deep in conversation with a visitor. And just all of her movements was the movements of a teenager. And she at this time would have been in her 80s. So that ageless quality is definitely true about Leo, and also the presence. Everybody remarked about the presence when she came to visit people. She'd come down the staircase and we'd have a whole crowd of people there, and they would all stop to listen to her.
Very powerful. John?
Well, I'll give you an example of how Leo built character as well. I'll never forget my first day. My first day at the palace. I woke up and there was a knock on the door. And the night before, Leo had given me a pair of doctor's slippers, and they fit perfectly. And I was so proud of those slippers. So when the door rang, I had the slippers on, my pajamas, and I don't even know what top I had on. I opened the door and said, "Hey guys, how's it going? Come on in." Next thing I heard was, "Johnny, could you come here for a moment?" So Leo was up the stairs around the corner, and she let me have it, man. And here you have this beautiful Italian marble Renaissance palace, and I'm answering the door in slippers and pajamas. So anyway, I was taught what character really is, and I demonstrate what it wasn't.
I love that. Did you want to comment on this one before we take our first break? Because I know that those particular paragraphs really hit home.
Yeah, one of the principles also deals with this character building and spiritual values must come first. Material satisfaction cannot be the final end and aim in life. And that's what I meant by how we'll choose comfort over character, right? And it was like, well, how much money would it take you to do what you say you wouldn't do? Right. And that's where you realize material satisfaction cannot be the final end and aim of life. But character building and spiritual values is such a great anchorage because of what comes from that. And I always say this in all of my lectures. If you want to feed the starving children in Africa, then carry your light in the city, in the place, in the home you live in. And that light you carry, if you help one man or woman, you help every man or woman. So, you can go to Africa and try and feed them too. But if you're not going to go there, the way you can feed those starving children in Africa is to be kind, to be humble, show character, be generous, gregarious, and not be greedy or hoardy. And that will help all mankind, which will elevate and feed those children in Africa. So, a lot of us go, well, there's starving children, there's crime and all that stuff. But if you remain the character that you're supposed to be, that is of your highest self, that will affect the rest of the world like a domino effect.
Kimberly, if I could just interrupt just for one moment before we go on the break. I think it's fitting that Mr. Porter is not on this evening. And I'm going to tell a story real quickly here.
Here we go.
He's listening.
I know he is, so I'm going to speak for him. So out of the blue, now here I am with these broken ribs. I'm in pain. I'm sitting in my chair, and I'm just trying to get through the evening. And my phone rings. And it's Mr. Porter. And him and his son are broken down in Harrisonburg. And they don't have a set of keys for their vehicle. They got lost. And I'm like, oh, my God, you got to be kidding me. So 3.5 hours later of me getting up with my broken ribs and going out, I had to go to Jim's place, find the keys, go up over the mountain, drive to Harrisonburg, and then from Harrisonburg back home. But it was important, whether Jim was, and Nathan are related to me or not, I would do that for anyone. So I think it's important that when we have opportunities to demonstrate character, it's important that we follow through.
I want to add one more compliment before we go, and I want to validate what John's saying. Absolutely. If there's anybody in my life that I know, if I called and they told me they were going to do something, John is one of the rare people in the world that I live in that I know it will get done. He will be there. And that is, says a lot about who he is.
So well said. So before we go, I want to mention, and I want to ask everybody to please put in the comments the word radiance, because what this section talked about was the radiance that comes from people who are exuding that light. And radiance is a really powerful word, and I don't want us to go past that. My daughter, many years ago, I had short spiky blonde hair, and people would comment on my hair. And my daughter said to me one time, she says, "Mom, I don't think they mean that they really like your hair. I think they mean they like your light, and they don't know what else to say." And so I wanted to mention that for all of us, is that are we not only showing that radiance out there, but do we recognize radiance when we see it? And I know that for me, when I see somebody who is so full of light, wow, you can totally see it, you can totally feel it. And I mentioned to you at the last broadcast that I had some health problems recently, and I was recently diagnosed with Lyme disease. And while I was kind of going through some of that, I remember going back to that song as a child, "This Little Light of Mine, I'm going to make it shine." So I couldn't help but think about that we all can intentionally up-level that radiance and have that radiance shine more out to the universe. So may we drink in that word and not blow past that. It is time for our first 3-minute break. So for those of you that are new, we take a 3-minute break around every 30 minutes. So stand up, stretch, and team, when we return, we will be diving back into page 8.
Swing the golf club like I'm going to do.
8:59. We'll see you in 3. All right. You're within earshot. Please find your way back. Please find your way back. And I love the word radiance. I'm going to continue that conversation over here on
Honey,
page.
we're not on yet.
On page 859. So you were mentioning to me during the break that radiance is what?
Countenance. That's the spirit within, and it radiates, and it's an untangible quality, but you can know it, but you can't see it. You feel it with people. And a countenance is really important. Like, what is your spirit within, right? And that's where character building and spiritual values come first. Material satisfactions, I never want to compromise my character for that which my body needs. And that, for me, was a big learning lesson about character building and about applying this. So countenance became very important, the spirit within.
So I wanted to ask Margaret, and continuing this conversation about radiance, at the top of 859, you're going to see where I have the green highlight and the green bracket. Would you please share that paragraph? Because this is talking about this whole invisible presence. Well, Joey, will pull that up, top of page 859. And for you, since I know you have your own home study course there, the fancy one, Margaret, it says there is something infinitely greater about such a person. All right, you're on mute, Margaret, if we'll have you come off mute.
Oh, so sorry. There is something infinitely greater about such a person than what one sees with one's eyes. There is an invisible presence encircling him or her, which seems more real and overwhelming than the visible man himself. That presence hovers over the very works of such a man, and this one can feel but cannot see. One stands before his work with reverence. So sorry.
That's okay. I can cover it for you, Margaret, and let you get a drink of water.
Yeah,
and is exalted with inspiration if it be a spoken word of wisdom, the interpretive rhythm of a poem or symphony, or a gesture of friendliness bestowed upon a neighbor by the wave of his hand. And so notice that invisible presence, notice the word presence is capitalized. And so, John, I wanted to ask you just to comment on that, because when you were president of the university, and I know you talked a lot about this idea of this presence, and you actually had a chance, when you experienced Leo, you knew what it like for someone to have a great deal of light to shine out. Or searching for that light to radiate. John?
Yes, one moment. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's self-evident. It's within, and you don't have to ask somebody about it. You just, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear and listen, you'll be able to identify it, and you'll be able to attach your own value to what that person means or does or has done.
I'll chime in a little on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, when you think of it, everybody emanates and radiates their vibration, a field of energy that they actually broadcast. And so it's your field. And the people who actually do a lot of really great things have an energy about them that you can actually walk into and go, whoa. Or they just, yeah. And so I think that's your vibration. That's your field, your energy. And I think that actually even would go to what I would think Walter Russell was talking about, the magnetic field that you create, the gravity of what you pull and what you actually manifest and magnify out. So I think that's all part of a lens, your inner lens being magnified to the outer world.
Well, and what if we all, so I know that if we shifted our focus and we started to look for people's light more than looking for the trouble that's in the world, but we started to focus on seeing people's light. Is that something that we can purposely do more and have more intention? I'm curious.
Yeah, I'll come in on that one. I had when I had read the Man Who Tapped the Secrets in '95, I studied it for 6 weeks straight, every day, multiple times a day. I read it, And I had a great illumination in the meditation. And after that illumination for 30 days, and I can still do it to this day, but for 30 days straight, I could see the God light in every human being's eyes. And where that God light is in your own pupil. If you look, so when I look at people today, when I want to see the God light, there's always that little white light of reflection in all of our pupils. And I always look at that as the God light. So when I see that in a person and I look at that light, I'm always connecting to the God within them and the God within me. And I call that the God light, because that's what I saw for 30 days. I would see that little reflective part, as you can see in your eye, if you get next to a light, right? You can see that reflection. So I always saw that as the God light within. And that was my vehicle and way of getting in the window and seeing that in every human being. And it's interesting because some people would absolutely light up and talk, and you could see a jovial kind of expression, and some people would get afraid and walk away. It's amazing, because for fear that you're seeing something that they don't know what you're looking at, because they're not developing it. Their character hasn't come to the point of knowing that God light within. So we carry it for them. You know, the basic ingredient of all humility is desire to seek and do God's will. And we're going to get into humility in a little bit.
So, and Karen, this actually ties into what you were talking about the mirror, about wanting, really what we're all about is not only making sure our light is bright, but reflecting other people's light for them. I remember years ago, I started to have a gift come online. This is not in the Russell work. I'm sharing my own just personal experience before we continue. But you know how when you go into an airport, that you can go through the TSA
Screening.
Thank you, screen. Well, and when you walk through the screen, you have a little measurement about whether or not you're safe, you're clear, whether something you need to be patted down. Well, I started to notice that I actually could read people's light in a very bright way, very much like what Ken was saying. And for me, it was almost like a light quotient. A little number started to pop up. And what I found is it was a beautiful way to start looking for people's light, because whatever it is that we seek, we're going to find. So if we're looking for chaos and we're looking for destruction, we're going to find it. But if we're looking for light, you can begin to really very powerfully look for people's light. And so Rita says this, Susie says this, look for the assets in everyone and everything, according to KC. And Rita says this, that's a great idea, Ken. I'm going to start looking for that light in people's eyes. So very, very powerful. Very powerful.
You know, the one thing about the TSA machines that came to me is like, why does the alarm go off every time I go through it and everybody else doesn't? So they're like, well, police come, they start bringing handcuffs, man. I'm like, I must have done something wrong.
I have an answer for that, if I may.
Sure you do.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I'm just going to reiterate what Ken said about the light in people's eyes. And so when Ken is visiting me, you know, I look at his eyes and there's just this brownness that I see in his eyes.
Oh my goodness. What are we going to do with the two of you? All right. So page 860. So what happened on the previous page is that Leo and Walter were talking about the days of unions. And so it says, until both capital and labor realize that love must be the basic factor in their working relationships, neither side will be happy and progressive. And it talks about bargaining as it goes on, but in the next yellow highlighted, it says a settlement based upon the love principle. This means balance is the only one that will stand for all time. So let's pause for a moment, because I know Walter Russell has other works when that book called Think was about human relations. Do we in corporate, in business, do we find that balance and love is the prevailing philosophy yet?
Well, I got a great one as an example. Like, right, I've met I actually know a buddy of mine that worked for Prime, like Amazon, you know, as a driver, to find out they never give you 40 hours so you can get benefits. So you get no benefits. It takes management to get 40 hours a week to get benefits. They pay $20 an hour, no benefits. And they wonder why that people can't survive and live and be happy. And so, there's a lot of people in this world that say, I can't make a living because they're not paid enough, and I'm willing to do the work, but that money is not enough to make a living. And thus we have the imbalance of the character of people with wealth and the character of people that are working for the people of wealth, and why we're realizing it takes both. It's not just one. As a worker, as Kimberly said, work for yourself. I don't work for anybody. I never have since I've discovered this message. I work for God. And my job is to put love in everything I do. That's character building over comfort. It doesn't matter what I think or what someone's doing. My job is to do my best to bring the light of love into whatever I do. And the reason that's so important to me, and Kimberly says, boy, when you get locked on to something, you just lock on. And some people call it ADD. Some people call it savant, whatever you want. But I know what it is. It's the God focus. And when you learn to harness that God focus, there's nothing, whether it's playing music, arts, endeavor. And, one of the greatest things that any human being can do, and this is so important to remember, is to help another person. That is the greatest act, whether you're of high status or low status. It's the same principle. The greatest act any one of us can do is to help another person.
Well, let me ask the panel. So something I'm noticing. So I would say, based on Karen's laugh and some of our comments, we understand that in business, we have not reached the love principle or balance in many places. What I am noticing, and there are many, many industries now that are facing huge deficits of people to hire. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people that will not be able to face positions. So one of the conversations I've been having with leaders is the old model of business and corporate is the fact that people want to work for money and benefits. I am watching this younger generation. They are changing the game. Money is not their primary motivator. Benefits are not their primary motivator. They can figure out other ways to make money. And so the new conversation that's being held, and we still have a ways to go, is how do you get people to want to work with you and be on board with your company because they're driven by purpose, because they're excited about making a difference in the world, because they want to bring balance and help others. Do you all see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think those are the people that stay at home with mom and dad, live with mom and dad, and have no responsibilities. They don't have to pay any bills.
No,
They got it made.
I'm
They got
seeing.
mommy and daddy taking care of everything. So if you don't have something to work for or work towards, I don't see that happening.
But I'm watching a change, John, and in all fairness, I mean, when we look at this generation, one of the ones they said to me recently, they said, why am I working hard to buy a house? He's like, I can't buy a house. You all could buy a house when you were young for 80,000, for 100 maybe. I can't even buy a starter home for less than $500,000. So they begin to lose their way. So I think the invitation is for us all to begin to say, maybe the old paradigms, the old belief systems about the way business should work. That's part of what I admire so much about Walter and Leo Russell, is they were trying to inspire people to see things differently. Margaret?
I was going to say, Leo Russell did have an equation in the book, Scientific Answer to Human Relations. And she was saying that profit sharing should become part of that equation. And so not all the profit should be shared. There should be some put into capital for further expansion. But management would get a percentage, the employees would get a percentage of the profits, so that everybody felt that they have skin in the game and that they matter. Yep. And there's like King Arthur Flour, that's an employee-owned company, and they've been in business forever. And so that's an example. And then there's also many other B corporations where they do give much greater importance on employees. And then I remember reading that even Google has a program where engineers can propose one of their passions as far as a project.
Yes.
And if it's vetted and approved, that individual can put their corporate time into their passion. And hopefully that will result something for Google in the end.
I
But
love that. I love that.
it's an example.
So Karen, you had a thought, and then I'll come to Ken.
I'm thinking of the pendulum swing. If we're looking at the fulcrum, right? This is kind of what you're saying, Kimberly. If you're working, and even if you worked really hard, you couldn't obtain the house, you're not going to work that. You're going to work for a completely different principle. But before that was the standard model. You're going to get a house, you're going to have your kids, you're going to have, a 2-car garage or whatever. And now, since that's out of sight, they're not motivated, because even if they were motivated, the 20 or 30 bucks an hour, if you're not making 70 or 100, which most people aren't, you're struggling, which is really what's happening to the middle class being gone and everybody else. That's why we have tent cities. That's why we have the things we do. So things at this point in time, for what you get for the most part, you're not going to get it. So why bother? So I think there's an equation that somehow is going to have to happen, or you'll be happy you know nothing.
Well, Walter Russell came up with the idea of co-op ownership, condominiums. We call them condominiums. That came from that basis of that came from Walter Russell, about instead of just having these, slumlords and these super wealthy people own these buildings, milk it for all it's worth, run it down, not really take care of it and maintenance it. He said, well, if you give the people that live there an opportunity to buy their unit, they could share in the expenses of maintenance, so it's not such a drain on you, and they actually have an investment in the whole building, not just their place. And they do. If you look at many condominiums, it's a cultivated. It's a group of people that are operating. Hey, we don't do that. Hey, we don't act like that. They make group decisions. So collectiveness is what came together. And that at the time, real estate banks in New York told him he was crazy. It would never work. And after he had shown it 3 times or something, he had 10, 15 banks offering him money to do whatever he wanted, to build whatever he wanted, in that guise of cooperative housing. And now look at New York. Now look at the world we live in. How many condominiums, apartments, and co-ops are there? Apartments aren't co-owners, but condominiums is the principle of that, of being able to own your own unit in a complex.
We have a huge thing happening where I am in Idaho, and they are making apartments that are 600 square feet. You can't put a dining room table. You can't entertain, and they're $1,400 to $1,700 a month, and at $20 an hour, you're still screwed.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it is. It's very challenging. And so may all that are listening tonight and in the future, may we start to elevate a brand new blueprint, a way of seeing the world, because I genuinely believe that's what it's going to take. Because John, in the next comment there on 860 and the green highlight, Joey, it says that when man knows his purpose on earth, his work and everything he does will become more meaningful. Knowing that whatever he does for himself will give color to his life.
Honey, you should always tell the paragraph where it's at. Okay, there it is. I'm sorry.
To the purpose of his life. The purpose of life has never been universally understood, so capital and labor resent each other for quite different reasons. Until unity is established between employer and employee, there can be no progress in industry. And then Margaret talks about that book, The Scientific Answer to Human Relations. We are at a pivotal time in humanity, and I am watching these changes. Companies cannot get people to work for the old way that they're working. And so, John, is there a group of people who slip through the cracks and maybe still live with their parents? Yes, but I would venture to tell you that what is happening is this new generation is inspiring us to look at the way we work differently. Because see, way back, we accepted the pensions, we accepted the big corporate salaries, we accepted all the hours that we had to work because there were so few other options to be able to make an income. That is not the case today. People are much more focused on balance, on work-life balance, on making sure that they can find a way to take care of their health and not work 60 and 80 hours a week. So I'm not professing that we are there, but I am inspired that the younger generation is saying, I mean, this just happened even with Dell a few months ago. They had a new policy that said, you all have to come back to work. And if you don't come back into the office, then you don't have a chance to get promoted. Do you know that 80% of the people replied said, I don't care. I don't want to get promoted. So this idea of promotion is an old, antiquated, what's happening is people are looking for purpose. So I'm simply offering that for more conversation because, John, I have a great hope And I see a deep hunger for people saying things aren't working, to what Karen said. This that we've accepted as normal is not working. And I believe that that things like what we're doing here with Awaken Your Inner Genius can plant seeds for a greater reality to be birthed.
Well, Leo had a great quote on this subject. She said you had two choices. You could live either a purposeful or purposeless life.
Mm.
And so that's what we're talking about here. So what gives you purpose? What motivates you to want to do anything?
Character.
But unfortunately, the structure of how this capitalistic world works, you're entrapped. And so what you can do is you either work within it or you work outside of it.
Or
And
you begin to rewrite how it's going. So Ken wants to read something to this purpose. But John, one of the things that I believe, so people who are tired, please don't send me emails being mad about what I'm about to say. But I believe one of the worst things that ever happened to this country of the United States of America is the Social Security Act of 1935. Because in 1935 is when Americans were convinced that if they worked hard enough and delayed their gratification, delayed their Social Security, delayed the fact that they could live later, that was the way to go. When you look back to the fact that Walter was sculpting all the way until he was 92 years old, his generation and the generations of character before, they were not waiting and giving up and living their life after they were 65 or 70. They planned to be purposeful and contribute, be a positive contributor to life from that point forward. And so one of the things that I see is that what happens when people are no longer working either? You want to talk about purposeless? So this is one of those things that's important for all of us to reimagine, no matter whether we're in the workforce or whether we're not. I know you have a thought before we go.
Nope, I'm going to wait till we get to humility.
Okay. All right. Any final comments from the panel before we take our next break here?
Well, I do want to say that Susie put it in the comment. It's like, it's the principle. We can all see a glass half empty, but how many times do you look at someone to see their assets, to see what's good in them? And that is what a person of character would do. We all can see people's failings and weaknesses, but aren't we more about fostering and nurturing their strengths and the things we find brilliant about them? And people really appreciate it when you can see those little nuances that they do and they give, and they like to be identified. So looking for the assets in everybody and everything, like what good came out of this? And that's one of the major lessons in this home study course. There is no bad. Ultimately, everything will become good. Even the hardest lesson you have that you feel is the worst thing that could possibly happen to you, when you come out of it, you'll realize, it made me a better person. Therefore, it became good I transformed it into an asset with humility.
Any other comment from the panel, Margaret?
The only thing I would add when she says until unity is established between employer and employee, when you have that unity, you've got that reciprocal, the rhythmic balance interchange happening between employer and employee, and it's humming along very productively. Now, when it gets out of balance, it's when it's gonna blow apart. So that's why when she speaks of unity between employer and employee, that's a beautiful concept.
Yeah,
it is.
And I wish that the mega corporations weren't so top heavy and that they would give back to their workforce.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Margaret, because think about how many businesses offer profit sharing now. That's like a thing of the ages. It doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
The management and the CEOs, they get profit sharing, but the worker, they don't get any profit sharing. It used to be 5 years you were vested in most companies where you started participating in profit sharing once you've given that company 5 years of your life.
There are some companies that do incentivize and do a contribution share, and that's actually a good principle, and I wish more companies would adopt it. But one thing I've seen as a realtor, that the little people, they're exploited in one other way, and that is through student loans. because I've processed a lot of rental applications, and I'm shocked at the amount of debt students are saddled with. And
Yeah.
I still remember processing an application for a lady that was in her early 60s. She was still paying off student loans.
Yep.
Wow.
I have a
And
friend of
so,
mine in his 50s that's doing that, still doing that.
So,
and
Susie says this, there's no way I would tolerate a job that was not my passion. My work is my passion. It's not a job. Love that, Susie. Maybe
Yeah,
may
very
many of us
good.
be inspired
Very
by
good.
you. And Deb Tonkin says this, the tiny house movement for young people and retirees is an answer to this philosophy, seeking experiences over being tied to a mortgage. Love that too. Many of us are reimagining what it is that we used to believe was normal. There is a lot more to say. When we come back from break, we're going to go into page 861, where Walter and Leah refer to something called necking parties. So be prepared to laugh. We'll see you in 861.
Ah.
Right. If you are within earshot, please find your way back. Find your way back. So, As we go into this page, there's several big subjects in these next few pages, and I wanted to just mention a few things that made me chuckle, because one of the things that I really appreciate about the Russell work is that when you go back to the fact that this was written in the 1950s, some of the things are not quite as relevant, and it just reminds you of a day of innocence. If it says there on 861, you'll go down to the paragraph where I have an LOL beside it, and it says, "Our world has become so mechanized and classified that the loving personal interchanges are disappearing." As we pull up 861 here, it says parlor games have been replaced by necking parties, and juvenile delinquency is ever on the increase for lack of loving parental and guidance. Young people should be given the opportunity of playing competitive sports, and they go on to talk a little bit more about that. If you'll scroll back up, Joey, I want to go to where I have things that circled. So see the yellow circle, please, a little bit more. All right. It says work and play, however, must be balanced. If either side outweighs the other and balance action ceases, joyousness and productivity also cease, and the end result is dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction leads to trouble. That is why we say that character is destiny, and we create our own destiny. Our own shall come to us. So let's pause for a moment before we get into the things around kindness and humility, and let's talk about work and play being balanced. So, panel, who wants to chime in there? Because we actually live in a world that not only encourages us to be out of balance, we actually think being out of balance, and I'm convinced that that's half of our problem.
I'm a problem child.
Yeah. Margaret?
Well, like I've been in business for myself for the last, I guess, 30 years now. But I still remember a nutritionist told me that you must stop work by 6 p.m. every day. You must stop work and consider the evenings your own. And very often I would be at the office until 10 p.m., and it was hard for me to schedule my own personal time. But when she told me that, I felt like I was given permission to have my own time and not just keep working. And I was a lot happier and actually more productive and more successful, which was surprising. So it is true that the work and play balance, it is almost just as essential as the balance between an employer and an employee.
Yes.
So in other words, I was a slave to my own company. And I realized I had to stop that. So, and I was much happier after that.
I got a question for Margaret and John. How many hours the author says balance and play must go hand in hand? How many hours do you guys work at that palace when you worked every day?
I shut it down at the 20-hour mark, Ken.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of room for play in that 4-hour window to sleep, huh? Yeah.
And then I got called up into Leo's room and got chewed out because I was sleeping too late.
The writing is good, but I'm saying I'll never forget this, because I went to dinner and Margaret invited me and Kimberly over to have this wonderful meal that she handmade. Oh my God, the best chuck roast you ever had with gravy and carrots, and I mean it was so wonderful. So anyway, and so I'm all excited thinking, man, I'm gonna hang out with Margaret. She got to hang out with Leo for 10 years. There's got to be some great stories there. So I says, I waited, I don't know, maybe about 10 seconds. No, I'm sorry, about 20 minutes. And I said to Margaret, I'm like, all right, enough of the niceties. So tell me, what was it like to live with Leo? I mean, what did she teach you? What did you learn? Margaret said, well, we pretty much worked 14 hours a day. So I don't know how much I really got time with Leo, because we were always working 14 hours. And then I talked to John. John says, yeah, pretty much worked about 12 to 14 hours a day, man. Sometimes till 10 o'clock at night every night. So here we have our author saying work and play must be balanced. So even the greatest don't always get it, right?
And also, Leo.
But there's an exception to that, though, Ken, is that I loved doing everything that I did there. and I did it for humanity. So I never attached the value system that they're talking about here. So for me, it wasn't work. It was just that was my life. That was my living. I didn't think of, that I'm working for somebody or that kind of thing. It was just me trying to promote humanity and then do whatever I could, whatever contribution I could make. But your point is well taken. But
I hope
I
so.
think of me as working there.
I think you just said what Susan said when she said there is no way I would tolerate a job that was not my passion. My work is my passion. It's not a job. And that's what you're saying, correct?
Pretty much.
Right.
Margaret's dying to chime in here, I can tell.
Well, it was the same for me too. It was a passion because I wanted to be a support to Leo. And so I looked for things, to do. And I saw the list. And yes, it was a long list. So yes, I was in the office at Swananoa, until 2 a.m. So
Or
I mean,
10 o'clock at night, real estate, Swananoa, same thing. I mean, it's work.
but it was so purposeful, and so it didn't feel like work.
Good for
Yes.
you.
It
Yeah.
really didn't feel like work.
And so that is one of the biggest keys about life to me is like, I don't work anymore. I put passion in the things I do, and there's fulfillment in that. I mean, I love going over to my buddy John's house, and there's tons of work to be done. But just like you said, it actually you can play while you're doing it. And that's what I'm hearing you guys say is that, yes, I work. And I'm hearing that's even what Susie's saying. Yes, I work, but I also, it's passionate. So there's play in it for me too. There's a fulfillment that isn't just about punching a clock in and out. And that, I think, is what you guys are saying. So you can work hard and enjoy your work, and therefore there's a pleasure part of work. So, and that is the greatest work, right? Is to find pleasure in your work.
So let's go over here to the top of H62. And John, I'm going to ask you if you would to read the first paragraph on down to where I have that sentence highlighted, because this is where they talk about kindness.
I wanted to make a comment real quick about that last subject matter, is that if you have your motto as you go about your daily life to glorify God, you won't even attach a value to what you're doing. It becomes timeless. So anyway.
I love that. Now you're cooking. That's right. We don't work anymore. We work for God, and that is always enjoyable.
And I would say working for God and keeping up our relationships is also part of staying in balance. So for all of us, it may not be work and play, but it could be work and investing in our relationships. It could be work and making sure our health is taken care of. There's a lot of things that can go into that balance issue. So let's just keep that broad. So we've got a couple more pages. So John, if you would start at the top with kindness.
Kindness. The greatest quality of a noble character is kindness. What is kindness but love in action? The more love we put into anything, the more inner joy we experience. And the more inner joy we experience, the more love and joy we can extend to others. This joy expressed in kindness becomes a snowball. And once it starts rolling, it never stops and gradually becomes a world snowball. Either the world becomes a snowball of love or it will disintegrate into nothingness. And you know what? There is no in between in that statement.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I got other stuff I could be doing on Sunday night other than promoting this message, but I can't think of anything that's more important than promoting this message and being with my fellow light beings here and those that are on, on these different channels and platforms and so on. So it's a good thing to serve your fellow man. But if you're going to serve your fellow man grudgingly, then you got to do some self-checking.
I'm with you on that. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here to the bottom of page 862 where I have the brackets, because this talks a lot about what's happening in society. There are countless people, this is where the yellow brackets are. There are countless people in the world today who are hitting back at life because they have been hurt. One hurt after another has piled up within them, and now it is exploding. This is the deep-rooted cause in most of the trouble in the world today. Man is innately kind. But being kind, he is often abused and then goes in reverse and wants to get back. When men and women make the giving of love, thoughtfulness, and kindness their greatest concern, all else will take its rightful place. Very powerful. Very powerful statement there. Anyone from the panel want to chime in before we go into humility?
I want to say something that goes back to that necking paragraph, right? And John had stated it. Remember, this was written 75 years ago. Look how much has come true. Look at, and I remember reading this 30 years ago and thinking, oh man, this is a little antiquated. This is a little dated. But by golly, if they weren't seeing the future and decadence started back then, what do you call it now with the internet and pornography, with marijuana now being legal, which is basically the drug of mediocrity? All those things that now it's just, oh, I'm creative on it. I can't tell you how many musicians I've heard tell me they think they're more creative on marijuana. That's about the biggest lie, right? That's called self-delusional. That's not possible. You lose your frontal cortex when you do that stuff. So, and then on this particular paragraph, it's talking about pain and hurt. And so when we got, I said about the Karens and the Johns in the world, and I don't mean, no pun intended about the panel. I'm just using those two words because that's what they call people when they're being kind of socially awkward or being socially inappropriate. You're being a Karen or you're being a John. Is it's telling us because they're hurt.
They're hurt.
People are hurt. That's why they're acting like that. It's not a lack of character. They're suffering. They're in pain. There's no profit sharing. There's no idea, like Karen's saying, to buy your home. You can't even rent a studio in Idaho. And by the way, Karen, that's actually a really neat place to live. Idaho is actually the new place that everybody's going to. But the point of it is a studio, $1,400 a month, guys. Think about it, $20 an hour. That's $800 a week. You take taxes out, you're probably looking at $6. So you're 6 times 4, $2,400 a month, and 1,400 of it goes right out the door just to pay rent. Now you're paying your electric bill, your cable bill, your internet, your food, all with $1,000 a month, let alone your car payment or insurance.
Your car insurance, your phone, your this. You can't.
You can.
Right?
Right.
So people are hurt right now.
They are.
It's not that people are failing or the world's failing. People are in a lot of pain. And I deal with people in pain all the time. I deal with traumatized people. And a lot of it has to do with this world, right? And Kimberly talks about this new generation. I'm going to tell you right now, they have information, but they have no knowledge. And information can be very misleading to think that you know something when it's just information. You don't know it till you apply it. So just because you Googled something and you remembered what you Googled, that does not mean you're smart. That means you parroted something that was on a computer that gave you access. Johnny.
So I'm going to come to Margaret, but I do want to. Okay. Before I go to John, I want to mention what Susie said. She says, I know I'm working for God. He's my new and only employer. Maybe that's why I love my work. It's in alignment with God's will. Love that.
That's
love
nice.
That. Beautifully said.
Nice.
John and then Margaret.
Over the years, last 20 years or so, what stood out to me is how society, and this is throughout the world, became incensed with body worshiping.
Yep.
With tattoos and all these rings in people's nose and the vaping thing and all these things popping up all over the place. And I thought to myself, wow. And then every corner has 2 or 3 different beer making facilities and so on. And I'm like, man, these things really aren't building character in people. Right. And that's the most popular thing. So you have to look at what's the most popular thing on the planet, right? And when you see those things becoming the most prominent thing, you're like, whew, man, we got a long way to go.
I have a lot I want to say about that, but Margaret, I know you have a thought.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, when they mention that people are hurt and so they want to hit back. But when you have the knowledge that's in this course, yes, people might hurt you, but you don't have to accept that hurt. You don't have to, it doesn't have to belong to you. That's why this course is so essential, because you can insulate yourself from the hurt. But also, one positive in the world today is that there's a lot of entrepreneurs, and the internet has enabled this. So, in other words, unfortunately, our educational indoctrination, doesn't give people the freedom to be self employed. So if people were to step outside of the educative indoctrination and step into being their own boss, they would be happier.
Yeah.
So life is what you make it. You
Yeah.
don't have to jump on the treadmill. As you know, when I see people with all this student debt, where did it really get them?
Right.
If they're still paying off student debt when they're in their 60s.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, jump off the treadmill, create a life that does and harness your own passion, and make a life out of that and a job out of that. And a lot of the young people are doing that today, so they do see that opportunity.
And I would add to that, Margaret, because what we all have been taught, that we are taught we were supposed to own things, and we were supposed to, there was a certain way of life, and you're supposed to retire, and you're supposed to do all these things. I'm really pushing back and beginning to question it all. So I think it's really important for us all to begin to question the way we were taught. I'm not so sure we are a better society for having people who are more educated. When you add the debt and the things that they've learned and been indoctrinated with, now there have been a lot of wonderful learning experiences, hands down. Are we balancing that with real world experience? That's something else entirely. But I want to go back to what John said about what's happening with the body. I don't believe this is accidental. I believe that we are inching closer to a time of the awakening of humanity. And you hear many people talking about the ascension of humanity. So whatever this means to everybody, what I do know is this, is that our spirituality can only advance at the same level that our body can handle the physicality. This has been something that I've known for many, many years. And that's part of why I have been so committed to things like green juice and wheatgrass shots and doing all I could exercise to make sure our physicality, our spirituality, the more we open up the aperture and we become connected with this light that they talk about through this entire course, the more important it is that our physical vessel can actually be able to maintain that light. We don't spend enough time outside. We spend too much time focused on things that aren't important. We're not getting enough oxygen. We're not getting enough pure water. We're not eating enough pure food. We are being tempted by everything from sugar to all these other pharmaceutical things to all of the beers and the wines. So everything is built to keep us from understanding that our physicality and our spirituality interact. Light is intense and it's very powerful. And that's why the Russell said you don't want to have it all at once. You want to have it one word at a time, because it does take a physical toll. And so for all of us that have been encouraged over the past few years, we're being asked to step up because our spirituality and our physicality is directly linked.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you one good thing I would love for everybody on the podcast to get is stop working for your employer and start working for yourself and the God within yourself. So when you go to work, even if you hit a clock and people are dogging at you, I always remembered all I can give is 100%. If you're giving 100%, don't let anybody tell you can do more. 100% is 100%. But working for yourself is glorify yourself and your work and stop thinking I work for this. My boss is a jerk. This company's terrible. They don't feed me, because you'll never get out of there if you keep resisting them. The way to get past them is to realize, when I do this work for the love of myself, for character, and for the love of God. And that's why I put my work, and why Susie really hit the nail on the head. To do passion means I got to do things that I'm passionate about. It doesn't mean that every moment is enjoyable, but I can put passion into every moment that I'm working. And that's up to me. That's character, right?
All right, so 83, as we're getting down to the last few pages here, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek of what next week's lesson is. I'm going to ask you, Love, since you love humility, if you would read those top two paragraphs there on humility.
Humility is love personified. How could one who knows love be other than humble? For he knows the basic longing of all souls to express greatness. This desire to express greatness is man's soul ego. Notice big soul. not his little ego, which is expressed through his senses and in self-aggrandizement. I'm sorry, what was that, John? Yeah. Aggrandizement?
Big word, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a big word. Can you spell it? I'm just kidding.
Yes.
And in other selfish ways. Humility is the it always makes me laugh. Okay. Humility is the mark of a truly great man or woman. A humble man is fully aware, no matter how great his accomplishments are, he knows he could do better. Because of this, he is embarrassed when praised. So, one of the things that I wanted to read on this is, I'm going to finish this out because I'm going to just say a little bit more on this. Humility grows as God awareness unfolds. See, this is the key. So, how do I become more humble? And the reality of it is, and this is in the 1950s, remember that, it brings a sweetness and a gentleness which is irresistible in young and old alike. Now, I have another book that was written in 1950, and it's called The 12 and 12, and it's the 12 and 12 that comes from recovery. And in that book, they have a writing here that kind of addresses the same thing. It says, with great intelligence, men of science have been forcing nature to disclose her secrets. The immense resources now being harnessed promise such a quantity, and this is back in the era of 2 cars and a garage, 2 cars, a picket fence, and a house, right? Such a quantity of material blessings that many have come to believe that a man-made millennium lies just ahead. This is from the 50s. Poverty will disappear, and there will be such an abundance that everybody can have all the security and personal satisfaction they desire. The theory seems to be this, that once everybody's primary instincts are satisfied, there won't be much left to quarrel about. The world will then turn happy and be free to concentrate on culture and character. So solely by their own intelligence and labor, men will have shaped their own destiny. And then it goes on to give kind of the bookend on all these strivings, so many of them well-intentioned. Our crippling handicap had been a lack of humility. We had lacked the perspective to see that and spiritual values had to come first, that material satisfactions were not the purpose of living. Quite characteristically, we had gone all out in confusing the end with the means, instead of regarding the satisfactions of our material desires as a means by which we could live and function as human beings. We had taken these satisfactions to be the final end and aim of life. So that's what lack of humility is, right? A lack of humility is when I think a car is more important than a person, when I think a job is more important than the well-being of other people, when I think of getting ahead is more important and undermining my associates or the people I work with so that I look better. Those are the things that I compromise character for comfort, those things that I think I need so I can get ahead. So, it helped me. And this is back in the 50s, a man-made millennium. Can you believe that? How many people you think would say that today in 2025, that there's a man-made millennium lies just ahead? Really? How many people? But they said that in the 50s, and it was an actual belief system. So we're, again, the age of character started in the 1900s, early 1900s.
And I would like to add to that as I ask the panel to comment. So what my experience has been is that there's a little bit of misunderstanding of what humility really is. And so Ken and I have had many conversations about that. Your definition of humility is doing God's will.
The basic ingredient of all humility is the desire, again to that word, to seek and do God's will. That is, to me, the best definition I believe I have found in terms of an application. Not just to know what the word means, but it tells me what to do. The basic ingredient of all humility is the desire to seek and do God's will as a way of life.
So what I've learned is that there has been this distortion that has seeped into society that I just want to bring to our attention, because humility is not groveling. So when we understand who we are and that when we have that divine light inside of us, we claim and own our value, and we stand in our truth. We don't even have to speak it out loud. It actually stands in our truth. It's when we enter the room, it is that radiance that we all talk about and recognize. What I noticed, though, is that because of the way we were programmed in other religions, and that we've been taught that we're sinners and we're less than, this issue of humility, in my personal opinion, has been weaponized, and it's made people almost not want to even step into the ownership of who they are. This was the basis of the book that I even wrote for women, because what I have found is that in society, both men and women, they almost take humility to a fault, where they will not step up and at least own who they are. And so what happens is that people who lack integrity are the ones who are stepping into these leadership positions. And so what the paradox of this is, and I promise I'm almost finished here, the paradox is that if we take humility to its extreme and turn it into groveling, where it's no longer humility as he's discussing it here, but it is our making ourselves so small that we don't want to be seen, then what's happening, and I'll come to you, John, what's happening is that the world right now needs people with integrity, with character, with love, and with balance to step into positions, to step into responsibilities that can be life-changing. And if we're playing too small, then we're not stepping into those positions. John?
Well, I have a system that I want to develop to help people build humility and character. And you know what that is? I want to get into the business of making humble pie for people to eat.
Boy, that's about the most humble statement I've heard in a long
funny?
time.
Are you being funny, John?
He's
because
being
I don't
funny.
get it.
He's
I don't
being
get
funny.
it.
Yes, he's being funny, honey.
Humble pie, you get it? So when
No, that's humiliation creates humility. That's not the best way to get humble humility.
So we're building character in people, and and people are growing to become humble. So every once in a while, life will give you that lesson, right, of humility. And one of the easiest and the best ways to do that is to eat a piece of humble pie.
Okay, got it.
Let me give that one level up, Johnny boy. Let me let this, if you will. We saw humility. We saw we needn't always be bludgeoned and beaten in humility. It could come quite much from our voluntary reaching for it as it could from unremitting suffering. A great turning point in one's life is when in our lives came when we sought for humility as something we really wanted rather than as something we must have. It marked the time when we could commence to see the full implications of what humility is.
All right, panel, anything you want to say before we go on to honesty in our last page or two here? Margaret? You're on mute.
Yeah, when you brought up, you don't want people to make themselves small. When the Russells reference humility, it's a natural condition of a person that knows God. So in other words, they're not making themselves small, but they know the immense power that comes when you know God, right? Yeah. And so they are natural leaders, but they're also quiet leaders. And that's why Leo often referenced Lao Tzu when Lao Tzu said, a leader is best when no one knows he's a leader. And the people say we did this ourselves. Sure. So in other words, an individual that knows God's ways and processes and works within them, yes, they're very humble, but they're natural leaders.
All right, well said, Margaret. I want to bring up what Bonnie's comment is. She says this. She says, I think humility is knowing where you fit healthily on this planet and what you are supposed to do with it. I think that's said very, very well, Bonnie. And Karen says, I really enjoy your real world conversation, how to hold this beauty of spirit and character in the world now. Thank you. Integrity, character, love, and balance.
I would just Margaret, really right on, Margaret. It's another principle within this book. During the process of learning more about humility, the most profound result of all was a change in our attitude towards God. And this was true whether we had been believers or unbelievers. We began as a sort of a bush upon in case of an emergency. The notion of God helping a little here and there began to evaporate. Many of us who thought ourselves religious awoke to the limitations of this attitude. Refusing to place God first, we had deprived ourselves of his help. But now of the words, and this is what I found out what it meant, of myself I'm nothing, the Father doeth the works.
So as we wrap up here, focused on the home study course here, I want to go to the bottom of page 863, and I want to mention a few things as we're wrapping up and then give you a glimpse of what's ahead for the next lesson. And they were talking about honesty right there, Joey. The character trait of honesty is not only essential to our personal peace and happiness, but it is vital for world peace and security. There can be no successful interchange in human relations, whether individual or collective, if honesty is not the fulcrum of the interchange. Okay. And they go on to talk about that they're witnessing so much dishonesty between nations. And if you'll go down to the blue brackets on the next page, Joey, I thought this was very, very, very powerfully. It says, an insecure man does not spend, for he is filled with fear for the future instead of faith. Trust between all peoples must be restored. To have trust, we must have honesty. And so let's just ask the panel to comment there as we're wrapping up before I give you a sneak peek of the next lesson. What do you want to say there? Yes, Margaret.
It's funny. They wrote this 75 years ago, and you can see it all over in our political system, because it seems that honesty is out the window, and it's who can scream the loudest or who can hold a narrative or a story the longest.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily an honest narrative, right? It's just a narrative. And so there's no trust between our political parties, for instance, just as there's no trust between some of our adversaries, I guess I should say. There's no trust and there's no dialogue because honesty is not the fulcrum.
Yeah, one of the things I heard, Margaret, now that you say that was out, the truth is what you say it is. It's no longer the truth. It's just what you say it is, which, like you said, the longer you can hold the narrative, the more people think it's a truth when it's an absolute lie.
Right. And unfortunately, that's actually the basis of so much of our culture, our science, and our political system. It's just a narrative, but it's not a truthful narrative anymore.
The definition of principle is an essential truth where all truths come from. And so if the truth is what we say it is, then 1 + 1 may be 3. Ask Terrence Howard. I think he thinks that 1 × 2 is not 2. Right? So the truth is what we say it is, or the truth is the truth even when a liar says it. The truth always resonates. It will never go away. So when you seek the truth, you will always find the truth. That's what I've learned in life. Be truth, and truth will always find you.
John, last comment before I ask.
Why honesty is so important. I'm just saying honesty breeds truth.
John, and then Karen, before I
wanted
share
to reference a speech I gave in 2017, and it was ethics in business. And towards the end, and I'm glad that I did not fall subject to the principles that the company I worked for in the industry itself, but they took pride in that their motto was lie, cheat, and steal anything to get the deal. But what kind of what kind of mindset is that?
Barbaric, right? It goes back to caveman.
Yes, and people wonder how businesses get a bad name, right? Because you got one shot. You got one shot to do the right thing.
Yep.
And if you don't, and so now you're scarred, and people will never forget that.
Yeah.
They might give you a second shot, but the nature of people, it doesn't change unless there's a catastrophic event in their life.
Psychic change or a psychic change.
All right, Karen, last thought before we show the video and I give people a sneak peek at next week.
Okay, I think I've lived in a time when I started my business at 22 and I'm 70. And I could do...
You look damn good.
Thank you. But for all of the years that I had my businesses with 23, all of the deals were done on a handshake.
Yeah.
And out of the 23 years of doing business, I only not got paid 3 times. And the total amount of that was $3,000. And I did millions of dollars worth of business. And because we each had our back, there was a symphony between all the suppliers and myself having the ad agency. And when things work that way, it is like a symphony. So is it impossible? No, I've actually had the joy of having a business like that with business partnerships that really had my back for 23 years, which I'm very grateful for. So it's an invitation to work that way, because when you do that, business runs for the client, for you, for your friends, everything happens, and it's beautiful. So it's possible. It's been there. I've experienced it. I've loved it. So
very well said. And I'll be honest with you, I genuinely believe that because we've had such an increase in so much of the legal system, that we've actually have been taught to be very suspicious of each other. And Karen, what a lovely model for you to remind us that we don't have to be. There are more people that are willing to do the right thing than the wrong thing. So what Susie says is this. I'd love to pull up Susie's comment there. She says, love this podcast. Thank you all. Thanks for putting a big smile on my face. I feel lighter. So,
well, on that note, kids, we are self-supporting through our own contributions. So if you out there could donate anything, Joey, if you could bring up the link where they can do donations, that'd be great, because we are self-supporting through our own contributions. It is a paid for podcast, so it does cost every week, and all your contributions help, and they really are positive. So if you can do it, that'd be great. If you can't, don't worry about it. You know, your growth is the most important thing. I don't see the link up yet.
And we want to mention that you can donate there at Buy Me Coffee, but you can also donate at philosophy.org. And under their donate, they just made a box where you could actually dedicate and say it's given towards the Awaken Your Inner Genius. So they've been working hard to try to support us on the endeavors that we have going on as well. So I will give you a sneak peek for the next unit. But before we do, we did ask Karen for just a quick video. She went back to take a look. It's a short 3-minute video of remembering what it's like to look at for the mirror. So as may we be a mirror for the world of love and light. So let's let it roll.
Mirrors and lens, the logic of God's universe, a cosmic feedback loop of light and emotion. We live in a universe not of random events, but of precision, one governed by waves, balanced interchange, and the divine logic of electric motion. Every judgment we hold is a signal seeded into our field. This emotional frequency becomes a note in the great cosmic symphony, calling forth reflections of itself, messengers cloaked in the roles of antagonist, ally, or mirror. Why do patterns repeat in our lives? Because they must. They are the imprints of our inner signature, our feelings encoded in light. In this electric universe, what we feel, we field. Our emotions broadcast a frequency that refracts through the cube-shaped lens of our own making. Why do patterns repeat in our lives? Phi, then, becomes a feedback loop of electric memory and mirrored experience. Every encounter, especially the difficult ones, echoes back a part of the story we have yet to rewrite. Until the energy is transmuted, it will return, like a wave seeking stillness. Russell taught that all motion is mirrored motion. Opposites seek union through rhythmic balanced interchange. Light divides only to unite. So too, our hurts seek healing by surfacing again and again, inviting us to rise beyond them, not to fight, but to recognize. That we live in a wave-based, mirrored universe where story, emotion, and thought are not separate from form, but the very blueprints of it. As above, so below. As within, so without. We are not victims of circumstance. We are architects of resonance. Let each repeated pain become a portal to awareness. Let the antagonist become the revealer of your own encoded light. And let your feelings become purified fields, clear signals of harmony, love, and creation. Because when the emotional field clears, the signal changes. And when the signal changes, the pattern ends. And when the pattern ends, a new octave begins. Reflections mirrors lens.
So a gracious thank you to Karen for making a lovely video. All these different things that are having reminders, and Deb says, love the voiceover, Karen. So thank you very, very much.
I'm learning.
All right. So, and Rita loves the Architects of Resonance. That's beautiful, Karen. So I want to say a gracious thank you to you all. So next week, we will be into lesson number 47. So for those of you that have your home study course, we still want to encourage you to get a copy of your own home study course. It talks about God's purposeful intent for man and the power of a mother's love. And this was the lesson that really got me with the Russell work, talking about how we're all mothers really of the universe. And that's the power of the love that we're bringing. So panelists, any final thoughts?
Yes. I wanted to give our audience the ultimate example of humility, and that is God. And so when God created man in his own image, what an unselfish act. So if you're struggling with humility, think about that sometime.
Very good. Thank you, John.
You bet, Margaret. You look beautiful tonight, by the way, Margaret.
Oh, thank you.
You're just amazing. I like the wave in it.
Where's our gracious hosts?
Yes.
It's appeared on us.
Isn't that something? That's typical, isn't it? Here we're talking about character and light and love, and they skip out on us at the end.
They're going naked.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, well, it was very much.
It was.
Joey, I think that's a, what do you call that? That's a wrap.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute.
What?
I thought I heard Ken's voice.
Did you? No, I think, yeah. So anyway, thank you, everybody.
All right, guys. Wonderful seeing you.
See you next week.
All right. You bet. Have
All
a
right.
good
Good
week.
night.
Okay.